Tonight, we are going to dedicate the class. Wendy is here, Wendy Fielding, and it's her brother's yurtzeit tonight. His name is Yosef Michael ben Anshel Halevi. And so we're going to dedicate our learning to an Aliyat Neshama for Yosef Michael ben Anshel Halevi. And after the class, we'll ask Wendy to share some thoughts about her brother. Okay, so we are beginning on the 5th chapter of the second book of Kings. But before we start, I want to give some thoughts about Elisha the Navi. We've been following we'll call them the escapades of Elisha for a couple of weeks now, from the time that he was appointed by God to take over from Eliyahu Navi. And we learned how he witnessed Elijah the prophet rising up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And because he witnessed it, he had asked to have double the spirit of Eliyahu. And Eliyahu said, if you see me rising to heaven in a fiery chariot, you actually see it, you will be blessed with double my spirit. And as we've mentioned, it's recorded in the book of Kings, 8 different miracles that Eliyahu Navi did. And here we're in the middle of 16 miracles that Elisha performed. And so tonight we're going to learn a number of different stories about Elisha the prophet. And next week we'll have even more. We'll probably finish the stories of Elisha next week, but we're in the middle of it. And tonight, as I was preparing, I see that there's not a lot of great explanations here, great meaning. The storyline tells what we need to know. Many times there's a certain incident and we can spend a half a class just exploring the meaning of these different incidences. I found that we're going to do chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, I believe. And like I said, the stories tell what we need to know. So that's why I wanted to take just a little time before, just to have some reflections about Elisha. It turns out that Elisha was the head of the prophets, and we learned they were called the Bnei Neviim, the sons of the prophets. This was at a time where there were schools of prophecy, and it was very well known and spread the idea of learning the methodologies that could make someone available, a proper vessel for prophetic experience, or even to be a prophet. Almost everyone who went to these schools did not become a prophet in the sense that they're recorded in the Tanakh. But we're told in Masechet Megillah that during this time there were 1 million prophets, meaning people who are on the level of receiving prophecy and had experiences, prophetic experiences. Not necessarily that God came to them with a vision or a message for all time. That's what you see in the books of the prophets, starting with Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the 12 minor prophets. They all had messages that had eternal meaning and relevance. But there's something different about Eliyahu and Elisha, that they're not giving over prophecies of the future, but they are performing miracles. And if we look at all the other books of the prophets, we don't see them performing miracles. We know in the Torah that Moshe performed many miracles, all of the plagues. But there, it was very clear that because each plague, God said, go to Pharaoh and tell him that if he doesn't let the people go, this is what's going to happen. So we definitely get the feeling that God is doing all of the miracles. And yet he insisted, especially at the whole discussion at the burning bush, where Moshe actually said to God, if you read in between the text, is, what do you need me for? You're going to be doing all of this. You're performing the miracles. You're changing nature. You're bringing Israel out of Egypt. What do you need me for? And here, this is a very, very important concept where God insists on our partnership. And so there is a difference with Elisha and Eliyahu. They're both called prophets. But again, you don't see them giving over these eternal messages. And yet, so much of the book of Kings, the first book of Kings and the second, are about Eliyahu and Elisha and all of the miracles that they did. So here we know that all of these figures are archetypal. And so here we learn about the whole idea of, call them miracle workers, that throughout Jewish history, you look in the Midrash, you look in the Talmud, especially during the explosion of the Hasidic movement, so many of the Rebbes were considered miracle workers. And among the Sephardim also, they had miracle workers and people who attested firsthand to the different miracles that were performed. So I just wanted to put Elisha and Eliyahu in some kind of a context here. Because like I said, they're very, very different. In the book of Judges, now we have Shimshon. And Shimshon had, call it a superhuman strength when the hand of God was upon him. So in all of these cases, you see it's really God who is doing the miracles, but through the partnership, through the vessel of enlightened individuals. Here, sometimes with Eliyahu and Elisha, it's clear that it's God doing the miracle, but many times in the actual text, it just sounds like they are doing the miracles. But it's important to state that even when it doesn't say explicitly that God is directing them to do a certain miracle, or it's not explicit that God is working through them, that is how we understand it. But nonetheless, in many of these stories, there's no mention of God when Elisha or Eliyahu performed a miracle. So in the bigger picture, Elisha was the head prophet for approximately 60 years. And he was the prophet of many, many different kings. As we're going through these stories, we see that many of these kings didn't last that long because they were almost all evil. Eliyahu and Elisha are primarily operating in the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes. Not that they didn't have a connection with the southern kingdom, but most of their interaction with the various kings and the just who they were dealing with was mostly the kings of the northern kingdom. And as I said, because they were virtually all evil, some of them didn't last that long. So he was the prophet of many, many different kings over 60 years. So I just wanted to have that as an introduction to the stories that we were going to tell today. And again, we can't go through every detail. Everyone has the ability to open up the book of Kings. But here I'm just going through the storyline and trying to add a few insights here and there. So the beginning of chapter 5, we have a story. We has a lot of details. Virtually the entire chapter is about this one incident and a sub incident that comes out of it, and that is that the king of Aram is to the east of Israel. It's one of the neighboring kingships. It's hard to call them countries at that time, usually like kingdoms. And as we're going to see, there's a very interesting relationship here, because sometimes they are fighting against Israel, and sometimes you see Elisha going into Aram and he's not harmed, and he prophesies in Aram. So here, and it's not easy to understand the flow of when they're fighting and when they're not fighting. Nonetheless, the reputation of Eliyahu and Elisha went before them, not just in Israel. They were known in the whole area, because especially when you're performing miracles, word gets out. So the general of the king of Aram, his name was Naaman, and he had sarat. He had a skin disease, and in one of the wars with Israel, he had captured a young Jewish girl and became his servant. And she said to him at one point, "Why don't you go to the famous prophet Elisha, and he could heal you?" And so Naaman listens to her, and he asks permission from the king of Aram. And the king of Aram gives him all of these presents to take to the king of Israel with the request, "Please accept these gifts and heal my general." Like I said, it's a bit of a strange relationship here, because this is the same Aram, as we're going to be learning tonight, that is fighting against Israel here and there. So anyways, Naaman comes with all of these gifts for the king of Israel. And one second. I'm sorry, one second. Sorry, we forgot to put it on mute. It does happen. So he comes with this letter from the king of Aram saying, "I'm sending all of these gifts. Please have my trusted general healed." And so the king of Israel, the way he reacts is, this must be a setup. How can I heal this person from Sarat? it turns out that in the letter, it seems that it's not mentioning Elisha. The king thinks he's supposed to heal this person, and he feels it's a setup. I'm not going to be able to do it. And now Aram will have a reason to fight against me. Elisha hears of this, either physically hears the story, or in prophecy, he understands what's happening. And he goes to the king and says, and the king actually rent his clothes. He tore his clothes as a sign of mourning. He really felt this was a huge setup, and he wasn't prepared to fight against Aram right now. So Elisha says, why should you rent your clothes? Let him come now, and he'll know that there's a prophet in Israel. And so Naaman comes, so Elisha sends a messenger. He doesn't even see Naaman. And he sends a messenger and he says, tell him to immerse himself in the Jordan River 7 times, and he will be healed. And so when Naaman hears this, he's outraged. It's like, are you kidding me? This is going to heal me by dipping in a river? I have greater rivers in Damascus, where I come from. I have to go to the Jordan, which is considered a very small river compared to other rivers. And he's really, really upset. But his servants say, you should give it a chance. This is Elisha the prophet. And if he's telling you to do this, if he would tell you to do something very, very difficult, that you would have to spend time and money and to do, wouldn't you do it if you could be healed? So here he's telling you to just do a minor thing, to immerse 7 times and you'll be healed. So Naaman listens to them, and he immerses 7 times, and he comes out and he's healed. His skin reverts. It even says it's like a baby's skin. He is so impressed. Now he goes to Elisha and he says, now I believe in the God of Israel. He was sincere, actually. Now I believe in the God of Israel, and let me give you presents and gifts. And Elisha refused, very similar to when Avram, when he saved the people of Sodom, including his nephew Lot. So he was offered like a reward, and he refused. He said, let no one say that you made Avram rich. I didn't do it to get rich. So Elisha refuses to accept anything. And Naaman says, in my heart, I will be praying to your God, but I want you and God to forgive me, because where I live, everyone is involved in idol worship. And part of what I have to do, I have to go to the temples of the idol worship. It's called the House of Rimmon. And I'm expected to bow down. And so please forgive me, and may God forgive me, because in my heart, I'm only going to acknowledge the God of Israel. And so Elisha sent him on his way in peace. So what happened after this is he had a main servant, Gehazi. And we've run into Gehazi in the previous class. And Gehazi comes up with a plan that he's going to go to Naaman, who's on his way back home, but he's going to catch up with him. And he's going to make up a story that there's other prophets that are coming to join Elisha, and they could use some sustenance. In other words, I know that you offered gifts to Elisha and he refused, but my master is asking for these people you can give. And Naaman is happy to do it, and he gives him money and gifts. And Gehazi goes back and he hides him in his house. And then Elisha calls him and says, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And Gehazi says, "Oh, nowhere. I was just hanging around." But Elisha is a prophet, so he knows what just happened. And he rebukes Gehazi, and he curses him with the same skin disease that Naaman had. So here I do want to point out that we see that Elisha was the student of Eliyahu Navi. And we know that Eliyahu was, we call him a zealot. He was very zealous and had a lot of gevura and a lot of din, a lot of judgment. And here we see Elisha very, very much following in his footsteps. Last week we heard the story of how either these young children, but we understand young, immature men were taunting him. And he cursed them also. And they were, whether it was literal or not, but they were punished in some fashion. So here again, we see Elisha is very gevuradik, very judgmental. But interesting, later we'll see Gehazi again, and he's still, it seems to be with Elisha. So that we'll deal with in a little while. So that's the end of chapter 5. The whole chapter was this one incident. And then the Bnei Neviim, the sons of the prophets, come to Elisha, and they say, where we are, it's just, there's not enough room for us. There's not enough sustenance for us. Give us permission to go to the Jordan River, and we'll make like a little settlement there. We'll make little houses, and we'll dwell there. And he said, fine, go. And they said, maybe you'll come with us. Maybe you'll join us. And he agreed. So they went to the Jordan, and they're setting up a settlement. It doesn't mean that Elisha is going to stay there forever. But again, he is the head of all of the prophets. And so it seems like he wants to help them out and help them establish this settlement. So while they're building this settlement, one of the prophets, his axe broke, and the head of the axe fell into the Jordan River. And he was very, very upset. And Elisha said, what's the problem? And he tells him what happened. He said, but it was a borrowed axe. It wasn't my axe, and I have to be able to return it. So here is one of the miracles that Elisha does. And again, there's no mention of God's name here, or that God told him what to do. So Elisha took a stick and he threw it in the water. And again, we don't know exactly what happened, but it caused the metal axe to rise up, and it connected to this branch. And Elisha said to him, he said, put your hand in the water. And right under the stick, there was the head of the axe that had attached itself to the stick. And that's it. It doesn't give any more explanation. This is just kind of one of the miracles of Elisha. Now, the king of Aram, remember, Aram is the same country where Naaman came from. Now, Aram is going to fight against Israel. Like I said, it's a very convoluted relationship that's going on here. And he took counsel with his servants and his counselors, and he set up a trap for the king of Israel. They kind of like infiltrated into Israel, and they seem to know the movements of the king. And so again, Elisha, we'll call it, sees this in a prophetic vision, and he warns the king, don't go to this place where you usually pass because they've set up a trap for you. And so not just once, but 2 times, the king listened to him. And when he was going to a certain place, he avoided the trap. So the king of Aram, when he heard about this, was very upset. And he's thinking, there's a spy in our midst who's like a double agent, and he's somehow sending messages to the king to avoid the place where we set up the trap. And so his advisors say, no, there's no double agent, but Israel has Elisha the prophet. He's the one, obviously, who knows what's happening here, and he's advising the king. And so the king of Aram says, we have to capture Elisha. He was outraged because this is spoiling his whole plan. And so he sends an entire army to surround the city where Elisha is. And that's what they do. They surround the whole city. And the servant of Elisha comes to him when he sees what's happening. The town is surrounded. Everyone knows. And he says, Master, what are we going to do? We're here alone, and we're surrounded by an army, us against the army. And so Elisha, he says, don't be afraid. There are more with us than who are against us. So the simple understanding would be that he's in a Jewish city, and so all the people are going to come to the aid of Elisha. But that's not what he meant. So he prayed, and his prayer was, open my servant's eyes that he'll be able to see. And it says that God opened the eyes of the servant, and he looked to the mountains that apparently were surrounding this city where Elisha was. And it says that the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire. And so the commentaries explain these are not the people of the city who are now coming to help Elisha. These are bands of angels coming in fiery chariots to fight against Aram, or to protect Elisha. Now, what's significant here is the language that he sees chariots of fire that are surrounding Elisha. So obviously this sounds very similar to when Eliyahu ascends to heaven in a fiery chariot. So here we see a very, very deep connection between Eliyahu and Elisha. It wasn't just that Elisha took over for him, and it wasn't just that he's doing double the miracles. There is a very deep soul connection between Elisha and Eliyahu. And so now he is surrounded by heavenly fiery chariots. And then Elisha prays to God. See, here we see God involved here in these miracles, because he's praying to God. But the verse is like, just open his eyes so he'll be able to see what I see. I see bands of angels in fiery chariots that are going to defend us. But again, he's praying to God. And so we understand that this whole thing is happening, that he's just a vessel, he's just a channel. And especially now, Elisha prays again. And he says, strike the army of Aram with blindness. And that's what happens. They all become blind, but it's not clear if it's physical blindness or we'll call it confusion. The word that's used is the same word as when the angels came to Lot in Sodom. And the people of the city, they didn't know they were angels. They had the appearance of men. And they surround Lot's house, and they want him to give up the people. And because in Sodom it was forbidden to be hospitable. It was one of the laws of Sodom. We don't accept strangers here. Strangers are not welcome. And so much so, it's just like a law. You cannot bring strangers into your home, into our city. And there also, it says that God struck them with this kind of blindness. So it's somewhere between a physical blindness and a spiritual blindness that they just don't see what's happening. So after that, Elisha says to them, basically, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Follow me, I'll bring you to who you are looking for. Intimating that I'll bring you to Elisha. And the army was completely confused or blind. And so it says he led them to the Shomron. And so when they came to the Shomron, Elisha said, God, please open up their eyes. And they opened their eyes, and the whole army realized they're in the Shomron. So obviously there is some kind of miraculous event happening here, that he's able to transport an entire army from wherever they were. It doesn't name the city where he is, but they were taken to Shomron. Now, Shomron was, we call the whole area of what's referred to as the West Bank is the Shomron and Yehuda and the Shomron. But there was a city called Shomron also. So somehow, miraculously, this whole army is transported to the Shomron. It could have been that they physically followed Elisha. It could be that he transported them miraculously. somewhere in between. And now the king of Israel comes. Remember, this is the same king who was afraid of being captured in this trap that the king of Aram had sent. And so now he has the whole army of Aram in the Shomron where he is headquartered. So he says to Elisha, should I kill them all? We have the opportunity. And Elisha says to him, these are captured soldiers. You can't kill them. And not only that, we're going to make a feast for them and feed them and send them back to where they come. And that's what happened. So here we see, I'm not saying this is the precedent, but we see an example of this idea of it's international law now that you can't kill a prisoner of war. You have to hold on to him until there's some kind of exchange or the end of the war. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we saw with our captives that although most of them were not killed, many of them were killed in captivity. Either the people who were housing them just got sick of it and didn't want the responsibility anymore, or in a rage. We don't know. But we do know, for example, when there were 6, including one of the American hostages, there were 6 being kept together, and the army didn't even know that they were close to the tunnel where they were. But when Hamas thought that maybe they were coming to rescue them, they killed them all. But here we see a precedent for this idea that you don't kill a prisoner of war. But then it said they went back, and the raiding parties didn't come into Israel again. And yet the very next verse is that here it seems that we have a new king, and he gathered up all of his hosts, and he is going to attack. And so he besieges the Shomron. And because of that, and because the northern kingdom were not very righteous at that time, there was a tremendous famine. And so what happened was that the famine was so bad, the expression that it uses here is that the head of an ass cost 80 pieces of silver, and a fourth of a dove's dung cost 5 pieces of silver. These may have just been expressions that no one could afford anything. There wasn't much of anything. And so those people whoever had even anything, who was charging so much money for it because they wanted to exist, that it was just a terrible situation. So the king of Israel is going out, trying to figure out what he does, and 2 women come to him. And a woman comes to him and complains and says, please help me. And the king says, how can I help you if God won't help you? So here we see, despite all of their idol worship, what is it called? A soldier in a foxhole. There are no atheists in a foxhole. So he says, how can I help you if God won't help you? Meaning, I have no answer for you. This whole famine is out of my hands. So she says, but listen to my story. I have a young child, and my neighbor, a woman, has a young child, and we were so desperate, and we were so hungry. And we know this from the Second Temple. There are many incidences written about they ate their children. That's how desperate people came. So these two women had an agreement. Today, we'll kill your child. It's a terrible thing. And boil them and eat. And tomorrow, your child. So the first day they killed this child. And then the woman says, okay, now it's time to kill your child so we have something to eat. And she refused to give over the child. And so that is the complaint that she came to the king with. And when the king heard this, he rent his clothes. In other words, when he heard such a story, like how desperate have we become? But his reaction is, I'm going to get Elisha and I'm going to kill Elisha. So the question is, why is that his reaction? What does Elisha have to do with this? And so the one answer is that because Elisha didn't kill the army of Aram, he allowed them to return. So he feels that this is the same army that is surrounding them and creating a siege, which is making the famine happen. So he's blaming it all on Elisha. So he sends messengers to capture Elisha, and they ask, one second. And so he sends messengers that he is going to make Elisha pay for this. Elisha is sitting in his house with many elders, and he sees what's about to happen. And he says, don't worry, just don't let the messengers in here. And he says, listen, oh no, the messengers come, and Elisha says, listen to the word of God, who says, tomorrow a measure of fine flour will be sold for just a shekel, and 2 measures of barley also for just a shekel, right here in Shomron. Meaning something is going to happen to change the situation completely. The messenger hears this and says, like, what are you talking about? He says that if God would make windows in heaven, do you think this could happen? In other words, this is impossible. You're fantasizing. And so Elisha, again, who's very judgmental, he says, not only will you see this, but you will not be able to eat from this food that will now be very cheap. You'll see it, but you will not be able to take advantage of it. And then the story continues that there are 4 people who are leprous, and they're starving to death. And because they're lepers, no one wants to get near them. And so they're like totally desperate. They don't know what to do. So one of them says, let's just go to where the army of Aram is and just beg for mercy. Like, they might kill us, but we're going to die from starvation here anyways. So we might as well do this. So they go and they get to the camp where they expected to see the army. That's where everyone thought they were. And they get there and it's empty. There's no one there. But all of the tents are there and all of their possessions are there, including food. And so they can't believe their eyes. They start eating. They start gathering up all the possessions. We're going to be rich. And they're like, unbelievable. God has saved us. And then one of them says, I don't think we're doing right here. Everyone in Shomron is dying of hunger. And we're going to just stay here and just eat the spoils and take the spoils and disappear. It's not right. So they go to the king and they tell him that we got to the camp and we don't understand, but it's empty. Everyone has fled. So the king is very suspicious. He's thinking this is a trap, just like they tried to trap me before. This must be a trap. They must be just right around the corner, right around the ridge. And they're going to wait for our army to come, and then they're going to surround us and kill us. And so they decided, okay, but maybe, who knows what happened here? Let's just send a couple of people and we'll see if they're telling the truth. Maybe they're not even telling the truth. Maybe they're double agents. We don't know. So they send a couple of people, and it's true. It's an abandoned camp. And it was full of food and vessels and garments. And they couldn't believe it. And so what happened was, word gets back, all the people come, they take all of the booty, all of the food, and the next day, just like Elisha had said, that flour would cost only a shekel and barley would cost 2 shekels. And so what happened was this messenger who came thinking he was going to capture Elisha and take him to the king, he sees all of this happening and he can't believe it. And what happened was, so he comes into the gate of the city, and somehow he was trampled. In other words, it's like an upheaval here. That after all of this famine, there's now food, and somehow in the gate of the city he is trampled and he dies. So just like Elisha said, you will see it, but you will not be able to take advantage of it. So here we just see miracle after miracle that Elisha is performing. And as I said in the introduction, Eliyahu and Elisha, they're really the only ones in the Tanakh that these kinds of miracles are being performed. As I said, Moshe made miracles, Shmuel made a miracle, Shimshon, in a certain way, lived a miraculous kind of life. But these were like individual incidences, singular incidences. Well, here we see Eliyahu and Elisha, their whole lives is just one miracle after another. As I said, Elisha was the main prophet for 60 years. We don't know exactly the time frames of all of these events. Then we're in chapter 8, and here we'll go a little bit quicker, where here we're told that there is another famine. Like I said, these stories, they don't tell us the dates or how many years after. It's not easy to come up with a chronological understanding, but apparently here, and we also know the idea that there's no before and after in the Torah. So here, it's possible that this was the same famine that was happening. Nonetheless, if we remember the great woman, the Shunamite, whose son Elisha did Techiyat Metim, resurrected the dead. And so he comes to her and says, this famine is going to last for 7 years. So I'm advising you to go to the land of the Philistines and ride it out. So here's another example. The Philistines and Israel were fighting on and off for literally hundreds of years. At the time of Shimshon, they were fighting. At the time of Shmuel, they were fighting. At the time of David, at the time of Shaul and David. Here, we're substantially afterwards. But here, they go to the land of the Philistines, and she lives there with her family for 7 years, and then the famine ends, and she comes back. And it turns out that the king is talking with Gehazi. Remember Gehazi, who really did something very wrong by getting Naaman to give him money behind Elisha's back. Nonetheless, here he is, and the king says to him, tell me about all the great things of Elisha. You are his servant. You have seen all of this. So Elisha is telling him all of these stories, and kind of like who walks in right then? The Shunamite, this woman. And he says, I can't believe it. I just told you the story of how he resurrected a child from the dead. This is the woman. And so the king is very impressed. And she says to him, we were gone 7 years, but people took our land. And it's not right. You're the king. You need to make it right and return our land to us. And he does. And that's what he does. So here, Elisha is not even really a part of it, but in a certain way, he saves this woman again, and he's not even there, just his reputation. And then we have just one more story here, and that is now Elisha goes to Damascus. And remember, Ben-Hadad, this is the king of the time of the famine, and his army somehow fled. And he's sick now. And he takes his second in command, whose name was Hazael. And he said, take a present and go to Elisha the prophet and ask him, am I going to recover from my sickness? So Hazael goes to Elisha, who's in Damascus, and he brought presents to him. And he said, the king wants to know, is he going to recover? And so Elisha says, go to him and tell him he will recover. But then the text says, but the truth is he will not recover. And so Hazael is like what's going on here? And Elisha begins to cry. And Hazael says, why are you crying? What is going on here? And so he says to him, the reason I'm crying is because I see all of the evil that you are about to do and how you are going to lead armies against Israel and destroy many people. And Hazael says, like, how I'm in no position to do any of this. Why are you suspecting me that I'm going to do it? What does this have to do with the king recovering? So he says, because God has shown me that you are going to be the king. And so Hazael, again, he's hearing the words of God through the prophet. So he goes back and he says to the king says, what did Elisha say? Am I going to recover? And he says, yes, you're going to recover. The next night he comes in and he smothers the king to death and he becomes the king. Now this is very, very mysterious. We'll say God works in mysterious ways that it's very, very hard to understand what the accounting is here. Why is God allowing this to happen? You have to remember, Israel, the northern kingdom, is very, very unrighteous. They're idol worshipers. They've abandoned the Torah in great measure. They've held on to some of it, but in great measure, they have abandoned it. And God is just showing Elisha measure for measure in an accounting that it's not for Elisha to agree or not to agree. God is telling him what is going to happen, and he's crying over it. And he's crying also because we would imagine between the lines here, Elisha is also asking God, can it be different? Why should this happen? Can't you change things around? But in the simple text, Elisha is just the channel for God's word. And that's why it says before, go tell the king he will recover. But then the text says, but Elisha knew that he would not recover. But he kind of spilled the beans to Hazael, what is actually going to happen here. And then the end of chapter 8 just gives, in very, very quick order, a whole list of different kings, how long they ruled, how evil they were, what wars they fought. And it's done very, very quickly. There's very little explanation. And that is the whole end of the 8th chapter. Next week, we'll continue. Elisha's escapades are not over, and we will see more. But here we're getting, I'm going to go back to how I began the class, that this Elisha and Eliyahu, they are like the archetypal examples of miracle workers. Again, when we look at the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, we don't see them doing miracles. They have visions. God speaks to them. They bring messages to the people, but we don't see them doing miracles. And the same thing with the 12 minor prophets. But we do know throughout Jewish history, there have been many, many people who miraculous events are attributed to. I will just mention this for those who have a good memory. I think you all know that I'm writing for Wonders, this magazine every week, and I have to be way ahead. So in another 2 or 3 months, I'm working on a whole series based on a book from Rav Ginsburg called Awakening the Spark Within, 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Could Change the World. And one of them, the third dynamic, has to do, the second dynamic has to do with the idea of people being able to perform miracles. So I'm just mentioning that because maybe you'll remember, and when you read the article, you'll remember that we discussed it. But even in our day, the one example that I'll bring is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of first-hand reports of what they consider his prophetic sight. He didn't like walk on water like Elisha did. He didn't raise the dead. He didn't defeat whole armies. But people experienced his advice that he gave people most certainly had prophetic insight into them. As I said, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of people who consider that their interaction with the Rebbe and his prophetic vision for them was truly miraculous. So that's just an example in our lifetime. Of course, there are many stories of the Baal Shem Tov, many miracle stories. But as we're taught, because that's hundreds of years ago, and many of these stories were not written down till many years later. And so it's not clear which of the stories are, call it legitimate, and which perhaps are exaggerations. But it's given over in Hasidic tradition that anyone who thinks that the Baal Shem Tov couldn't have done these miracles is mistaken. In other words, he did enough miraculous things that even if all of the stories are not 100% accurate, he could have done these stories. And the Ribnitzer Rebbe, who was the previous generation, scores of stories of people who experienced miraculous events. In the Sephardic communities, the whole family of Abu Chatzera, he was a very, very famous Sephardi sage. Again, but most of these stories now are told within the lifetime of these people. That's the difference. Like with the Baal Shem Tov, the stories weren't like written down till later. Now, already books were coming out when the Rebbe was still alive about these miracle stories. And the same thing with Rebbe Abu Chatzera. Like I said, hundreds of miraculous stories. And so what we're learning about Eliyahu and Elisha, even though they seem so incredible, and we don't really understand how they were able to perform these miracles, but it is important to understand that there were and even are people who are on this level where, again, I'll use the word channel. They're able to channel God's energy to perform acts that supersede the laws of nature temporarily. That, in a certain way, that is what a miracle is. A miracle is God is superseding the laws of nature for a specific purpose and for a specific time period, like the plagues. These are the parshas that we're learning now. We're learning about the 10 plagues. And each one of them lasted different opinions, but let's say a week. And then they were gone. So as we're learning these stories, it's important to see a bigger context of what we are learning.